Well, I'm super excited to be kicking off this brand new series titled Immovable. My name is Chris, and the year was 2012. My family, we had moved from Las Vegas, Nevada, all the way to the East Coast, and we started to hear some weather reports about an impending hurricane. Now, here's the thing about weather reports, and we get this living in central Pennsylvania. You can hear a weather report that there might be 400 inches of snow, and we just all know that just maybe 400 inches won't fall. Just one snowflake will fall. So we were hearing these reports, plus we're living in the Northeast, and we're like, hurricanes really don't impact the Northeast that much. And so we just thought, it's going to just be a big rainstorm. Well, as we got closer, all of a sudden the reality hit that, Hurricane Sandy was going to hit the Northeast. My wife and I, Kim, we started to Google because, again, we spent 17 years in desert land. We both grew up in Illinois, but we had never been, even around a hurricane. And so we started to Google, what should we do to prepare for a hurricane? And the number one thing on every list was a generator. Well, we're living right outside of New York City, and it's a large population, but it has a whole bunch of big box stores to find generators. And so we started driving around, and they were all out. Why? Because, 20, 30, 40 million other people were all trying to find generators. And so 2 days before the hurricane was set to make landfall, Kim and I were just staring at each other like, we got to get a generator. So she goes, I'm just going to drive. So she got on I-78 and started to head west. So as she was driving, I was on the phone trying to call every Home Depot, Lowe's, any other big box stores I could think of to see if there was, if they had a generator in stock. All the way along I-78, I'm calling. She kept driving. She kept on driving. She kept on driving. And every store was, out of generators. Why? Because some 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many millions of people were thinking the same thought. She kept driving that day, and finally, she found a generator at a Home Depot in Somerset, Pennsylvania. She drove one way, 283 miles, so we could have a generator. She bought that generator. She called me. She was so excited. She got back in the car, drove some 283 miles back to Summit, New Jersey. And I'm so glad we had that generator because we were without power for 14 days. See, here's the thing. We get the literal storms around us, but we all know that we encounter storms personally in our lives all the time. We just know that life is filled with storms. We know they're going to come. Usually we don't quite anticipate the intensity and the veracity of the storms. But here's the thing. We know in life, storms are going to hit us from the left. They're going to hit us from the right. They're going to come from behind, and they're going to come straight at us. And in fact, Jesus spent some time teaching about these storms in life. And Jesus' wise teaching said, hey, you better have a firm foundation. Not if storms are going to come, but when they're going to come. Not if you're going to encounter storms in life. You're going to encounter them, and usually you're not going to really anticipate the strength of those storms. So your foundation better be firm. And so how do you have a firm foundation? This is what Jesus said. He goes, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Those are two very important steps, to hear and actually put it into practice so that your foundation is firm. So when that storm crashes in on you, you can withstand it no matter the strength and no matter the, duration. So in this series, we're going to look at, 4 very, very specific storms that I promise you, if you haven't already encountered these 4, you will in your life. But not only are we going to focus on what these 4 storms are, but we got to identify So we know when we see them coming. And second of all, we got to prepare our foundation. Remember, Jesus said you got to hear, you got to listen to his words. I mean, God's word, the Bible, is our guide. And we got to put it into practice so that when the storm, not if, when the storm crashes in, our foundation can withstand it. So that's where we're going in this series. Now, we're going to follow along with a storyline of a guy named Joseph. Now, not Joseph, the father of Jesus. This is a different Joseph. He lived several thousand years before that. And Joseph, his dad was named Jacob. Jacob's dad was named Isaac. And Isaac's dad was named Abraham. And God made such an incredible covenant, a relational contract, if you want to phrase it that way, between himself and Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. Now, Abraham thought it would be about him and his wife having kids. He had no idea that God's redemptive plan was going to connect through him all the way to Jesus, and that through Jesus, when you put your faith and trust in Jesus, then you have life eternally. So God started to do his work through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, and into Joseph. And we're going to look at Joseph's life, and he's going to encounter all four of these storms. Now, we're going to jump into his part of his story. You can find it in Genesis chapter 37. And starting in verse 2, this is where we're going to start. This is an account of Jacob's family line. Now, the name Jacob, which is Joseph's dad's name, well, the author of Genesis goes back and forth between Jacob and Israel. And the name Israel is best translated one who struggles with God. You see, it all gets connected back to this moment where God and Jacob wrestle together all night long. And I love this story because it is such a powerful image that God is not only a personal God, but he's okay wrestling with us as we wrestle through moments of life. And out of that epic wrestling match, God names Jacob Israel. And so throughout the story, the author goes back and forth between, the names Jacob and Israel. So this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending flocks with his brothers. Now, Jacob was a very wealthy, very successful shepherd. He had large flocks, and so this is just part of, Joseph was working with his brothers. But very specifically, what the author tells us, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. Now, Jacob technically had two wives that weren't these two. These two were more classified as concubines. And so right away, we could spend some time here. We're not, but you could feel there's some family tensions because they weren't even classified as wives. But Joseph, who was, his mom was considered one of Jacob's wives. And you could feel like there's kind of layers within the family dynamics. There's levels within the family dynamics. And Joseph was out with them, and all of a sudden one day he brought their father a bad report. I mean, this is good old-fashioned. He tattletaled, right? It's just good old-fashioned. This is what's happening. His brothers did something that, Joseph felt like his father wouldn't approve of, wouldn't like, and so he snuck off back home to tell dad what his brothers were doing. Now, Israel, or Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of the other sons because, he had been born to him in his old age. You see, the family secret wasn't so secret. Everyone realized that, Jacob loved Joseph more than the other 11 sons. That there was a special relationship that was, way elevated amongst the other 11 sons. That there was a different relationship between Jacob and Joseph. Now, years and years ago, my oldest daughter was really young, and all of a sudden one day she started this saying with me that, well, has lasted to this day. She looked at me one day, and her sister, being almost 4 years younger than her, my oldest, looked at me and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm your favorite daughter." And she stared in my eyes to see how I would respond. And well, I was like, in that moment, how am I going to respond to her? And all of a sudden, this little thought crept into my mind, and I kind of smiled, and I looked at her, and I said, "Well, you're my favorite." Now, to Kiera, the pause seemed like a period, but it wasn't. It was a pause. And then, with my smile on my face, I said, "Oldest daughter." Over the years, this has been our little thing between her and me. Sometimes the pause is 2 seconds. Sometimes the pause is 2 minutes. Sometimes the pause is 2 hours. And all of a sudden, she'll hear me yell up the stairs, "Oldest daughter." And what I'm letting her know is, yeah, she's my favorite, oldest daughter. But what I'm also letting my youngest know is she's also my favorite, that I love them equally. But you see, for Jacob, he made it known that, well, his love for Joseph was far superior than his love for his other children. And not only did everyone know it, I mean, it wasn't a big family secret. He showed it. One day, he made a ornate robe and gave it to him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Again, it's one thing to know it, but when you see it, it's one thing to think it, but when you see it, it's one thing to kind of have side, dark room conversations going, "I'm pretty sure Dad likes Joseph more than us," but when you see it in full color, out there in full display, it has just such a deeper impact, doesn't it? His brothers hated him because of it. And one day, Joseph had a dream. And this thread of a dream will kind of lead through this entire storyline of Joseph. And when he told his brothers, they hated him all the more. So why did they hate him more? Well, it was all tethered to what Joseph dreamt. You see, Joseph had not just one dream, he had 2 dreams, and both of those dreams had everything to do with his brothers bowing down to him. The first one was only about his brothers bowing down to him. The second dream had his brothers bowing down to him and his mom and dad bowing down to him as well. I mean, you think about this. I mean, not only did everyone know that Jacob loved Joseph more, everyone now could see Joseph wearing this coat that reflected his father's love for him. And now Joseph is talking about, dreams about everyone else bowing down to him. The family tension, the family friction was at an all-time high. And when his dad, Jacob, heard about it, he rebukes his son Joseph and says this, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come down and bow down to the ground before you?" It's a question, but it's not a question. I mean, Jacob was making it clear, like, this is never going to happen. I don't bow down to you. His brothers, we're told, were jealous of him. But his father kept the matter in mind. And I think this is a real important moment. His brothers allowed jealousy to continue to work in the dark parts of their soul. His brothers allowed jealousy to turn into anger and rage and spite. His brothers allowed this sinful emotion to take over their entire being, but Jacob just kind of kept it in mind. He just kind of said, I should look at this. I should pay attention to this. I should recognize there's something going on within me, and there's something going on within my family, and there's something going on with Joseph. Well, time went on as Joseph's brothers went back out to the fields to watch their father's sheep, and so they were out doing that. And one day, Jacob comes to Joseph and say, "Hey, why don't you go out, check on your brothers, check out my sheep, bring back a report to me." So Joseph heads out to find his brothers. As he went searching for them, he finally sees them off to a distance. And as he comes closer, we're told that his brothers all said to themselves, "Well, here comes that dreamer." You can tell all the sarcasm is dripping off their lips. And then they looked at each other and remember all of that jealousy that spiraled into anger and rage and spite. All of a sudden they said to each other, "Well, let's kill him. Let's just kill him. And throw him into one of these cisterns. And say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." And I want to pause here with a caution. And this caution is so important because we can read stories like this and go, "Well, jealousy to killing someone, that's a pretty wide leap there." And maybe you're thinking to yourself, "Yeah, I've been jealous of, I've had some rage and anger towards people, but I've never even considered killing them." Well, we have to recognize within all of us is that our words, what we say to people, what we say about people, assault and destroy relationships every day. We just have to realize that within all of us. Our words, what we say directly to people, what we say about a person to other people, what we say behind someone's back, in front of their back, to the side of their back. We have to recognize that our words assault and destroy relationships every day. We splinter relationships, we divide relationships, we shove people down, we position ourselves against other people. We use even Christian words to do all of this. This is why Jesus' brother James says, our tongue, you better be careful of your tongue because it will set a fire and destroy relationships around you. We have to realize, there's a massive leap between jealousy and killing someone. But our danger, yours and my danger, is with our words and how our words destroy relationships. That's why Jesus prayed for unity within the church. Why? Because he realized the number one thing to destroy the church is from within when Christians use their words to create disunity. It's a caution we should all pay attention to. Well, his brothers were plotting on killing him. And we're told that Reuben, one of his brothers, heard this. And he tried to rescue him from their hands. And he said, let's not take his life. Let's not shed any blood. And he comes up with this idea in the spirit of the moment. He goes, "Hey, throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Why? Because Reuben wanted to rescue him. Reuben wanted to get him into a place where later he could come and get him out of that cistern. Reuben was trying to figure a way out. So they agreed to this plan, and they tossed Joseph into a cistern. And I think this is one of these hilarious moments. Joseph, their brother, is in a cistern, down in a well, an empty well. He's there. And they sit down to eat. They just get their lunch out or their dinner. They start to eat as their brother is down there, thinking he's going to die. I mean, I don't know what Joseph was saying when he was down in that cistern, but I'm pretty sure he had to be saying, "Come on, guys, get me out of here. Come on, guys, I'm your brother. Come on, guys, hey, like, it's okay. Like, I'll forget. I won't tattle on you again." I mean, Joseph was trying to do whatever he could to, save his life. And his brothers are they're just eating their sack lunch. ignoring the fact that they just tossed their brother down to die. Well, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah, another brother, said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So they sold him into slavery. And that's where we're going to pause this week in part 1, and we'll pick up the story in part 2. But this gets us to, the first of these 4 storms that Joseph is going to encounter. The first of the 4 storms that will, again, just maybe you've encountered all 4 of these. If not, yet you will. So the first storm is just simply relational ambush. I mean, this is what happened with Joseph. Joseph was just going out to get a report on, his brothers and his father's sheep. And he was just going to go back to tell dad what was going on. And as he approached, right, the ambush, the attack was being planned. His brothers tossed him down a cistern, and then sold him into slavery. You see, the closer the relationship, we have to understand the deeper the hurt. I mean, that's why we pause in this moment. I mean, this, for Joseph, was family. Family. His brothers he'd grown up with. You can't get much closer than family. You see, when it comes to the storm of relational ambush, what we have to realize is there's people who will ambush us, attack us relationally that are way disconnected from us. And I'm not saying it doesn't bother us at all. I'm not saying that, it doesn't kind of hurt a little bit. But the further the person is from you, relationally, the less the pain. The less you even notice it. Again, I'm not saying you can't feel it at all, but right, we get that. But the closer that person is, the deeper the hurt. And the deeper the hurt, the greater the urge to what? Retaliate. It's what we want to do. We want to get back. We want to get even. We want to get our revenge. We want to make things level again. You say that to me, I'm coming back at you. You make that decision against me, I'm going to make this decision against you. You position that person against me, I'm going to position this person against you, right? We do this all the time. I mean, these are the thoughts that enter into our minds. If we're not careful to take every thought captive, all of a sudden, before we know it, those thoughts are actually being lived out in our actions. And my encouragement for you is, don't retaliate. Why? Retaliation is like a grenade. You toss it, and the shrapnel doesn't only just hit that person you're tossing it at, but it hits every single person around that person and you yourself. You see, retaliation always causes damage to everyone connected to the situation. We can't avoid it. We can't stop it. Because retaliation, once we let go, it's out of our hands. And that explosion, it hurts. Untold number of people. So don't retaliate. What you need to do is recalibrate. Just maybe you pause and you just memorize that catchy little trite saying. Don't retaliate, recalibrate. Don't retaliate, Recalibrate. Because it's in the recalibration that we actually pause our emotions down. Where that hurt, again, the closer the person is, the greater, the deeper the hurt is. When we stop to recalibrate our emotions, to push pause and kind of back out of, well, the hurt that's been caused to us, then how we handle the situation becomes clear. And there's three questions that I want to encourage you. These are recalibration questions that will help you not to retaliate and will help you recalibrate. The first question is this: what does love require of me? Don't overlook this question. I mean, we're just, a week away from Easter. And Jesus asked himself this question: what does love require of me? And you know what the answer for Jesus was? The cross. You see, when you ask yourself the question, what does love require of me? You got to start at the cross. What Jesus was willing to do for you. The hurt that you've caused him. You see, the cross is the question that gets attached to what does love require of me? Jesus, who is without sin, who never launched a relational grenade at anyone, modeled for us what love looks like. You got to start asking yourself that question. I tell you, it will start to shape the answers to these next two questions. You see, the second question you got to ask yourself as you recalibrate so you don't retaliate is this: how do I honor God in the midst of my dishonor? You see, that's what you own. You don't own what that person has done against you. You can't own that. You don't own, just like Joseph. I mean, he couldn't own the fact that his brothers tossed him in the cistern and then sold him off. Now, there's some things Joseph needed to own. He wasn't completely innocent in this entire storyline, but there's a lot he doesn't own. And so you got to ask yourself this question: how do I honor God? And it starts with words. What do you say? What do you don't say? Who do you choose not to share that part of the story with? How do you edit the words that your emotions are trying to drive out from within you? How do you edit those words and hold back so that you don't sin within your words? How do you honor God even when you've been dishonored? Because ultimately, what God's going to hold you accountable to is how you honor him. And just that question gets connected back to the first question: what does love require of you? And first and foremost is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul and strength. One day, you're going to have to give account to everything you have ever done and said. And those two questions lead to the third one. Who do I need to seek wise counsel from? This is the greatest pause button you can ever have. Before you speak, before you hit those buttons on your phone and hit send on that text or that email, before you open your mouth, before you try to handle the situation, is find wise counsel. And wise counsel is people who ask themselves those two questions: what does love require of me? And how do I honor God? What does love require of me? And how do I honor God? What does love require of me? And how do I honor God? And lean into wise counsel as they try to help you not to retaliate, but to recalibrate, to lead through a relational storm. That remember, the closer the relationship, the greater, the deeper, the more intense the hurt is. Now, we have the vantage point of knowing the end of the story. And it would be easy for me to wait to share this insight, these words that Joseph himself said, until the very end of the series. But I want these words to guide, because these are the words that I believe guided Joseph through every one of these 4 storms. These are the words that God was speaking into him through every one, especially this first one, relational ambush. I don't know this to be the case, but I almost wonder if God whispered into Joseph's ear in that cistern these words, because you see Joseph handle these storms with so much honor of God. And at the very, very end of the story, Joseph says these words. He goes, "You intended to harm me." This is to his brothers. "But God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." He said these words have to guide you. What you intended for bad, what you intended for evil, what you intended for harm, what you intended for, God can take and turn it for good. You see, when it comes to the storms in our lives, sometimes we might not see what God is going to do with it, but God has just asked us, called us to honor him, to be faithful to him. And if we do that, one day, we're going to look back and see how God took some of the worst storms in our lives and he flipped it, he turned it for his good. Let's pray. Lord, I pray. Lord, I ask you that all of us, because we have a name or two, that have relationally ambushed us. So Lord, I just pray. I pray that we will show strength sourced from you to not retaliate, that we'll pause to recalibrate so that our words, our actions are loving, our words, our actions are honoring of you. And that, Lord, through that, you can work for your good. In your name I pray.